How's it going, everybody? This is Dave Meltzer. We're going to be here for the next 2 hours talking pro wrestling, and this is going to be a very special show today. We're going to be talking about Johnny Valentine, who was one of the biggest stars in the history of this industry. He passed away at about 3 a.m. today. He'd been sick for a long, long time. Many people who had been following his, he'd just been in and out of the hospital. There were many times where they thought he didn't have much time left. He fought it for well over a year. We're going to have Red Bastien, who had visited him many times, who could probably... they both live in the Dallas area, and Red Bastien was one of Johnny Valentine's big rivals in Texas in the 70s. We're also going to have Ric Flair up, and we can also talk to Ric Flair about his current situation, and also Les Thatcher, who grew up watching Johnny Valentine, and Larry Matisic from St. Louis, who we've had on the show also many times in the past, who announced some of Johnny Valentine's greatest matches in the St. Louis area in the 70s. So this is going to be a memorable show. In fact, I would suggest some of you who are older fans would probably want to get the tape recorders ready for this one, because I expect it to be really good. We've got Bryan Alvarez of Figure 4 Weekly here, and I also want to mention that Dan Severn, who was scheduled to be our guest, we're going to reschedule him just because of the Johnny Valentine situation. I thought it would be better to devote this show talking about him, and also for a lot of newer fans to basically learn a little bit about a guy who was not necessarily the most liked man in wrestling, but certainly someone that everyone from the 50s, 60s, and 70s certainly knew about Johnny Valentine's reputation. Bryan, how are you today?
I'm doing good.
Okay, that's good. I think first thing we should do is talk a little bit about last night's television. Bryan, what were your thoughts on the show?
I didn't think that Raw was I thought it was a decent show, but I think the whole thing with me, again, was it all came down to the main event, and there were a lot of things they could have done in that main event, and what they did was they had Steve Austin give Matt Hardy the stunner, and then Hunter pinned him, and right then I just thought, next week they can do the six-man with Hunter, Austin, and Ivory versus Hardy's and Lita, and Hunter can pin Lita and just make it a straight 3.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, there was something about the show. Obviously, the wrestling was really rushed, which I understand was not necessarily by design. It just worked out that way. They spent all this time building up the submissions for, Benoit and Jericho against Regal and Angle, which actually was scheduled to be, at one point, the pay-per-view match. So they gave, instead of saving the submission match for a subsequent pay-per-view, they gave it away on TV and did a 2-minute match, and it was, it was just too rushed. There's no way and they were going in and out of submissions like 20 seconds in. The idea was to get submissions more over, but I really think that it almost, I don't know, it didn't, when they get them so easy, I don't think they mean anything.
Well, there were two things to me. The first one was, it seemed to me like they had a show, and of course Vince McMahon has a main event in his mind for the pay-per-view, and it's already been announced and everything like that, but there's only 1 week left because it took them so long to actually get everything in order. And it almost seemed like you had Undertaker and Kane come out in the opening segment, and then at the top of the hour you had Hunter and Austin come out and do an angle, and then you had an angle in the main event as well, and it was like they had 3 weeks worth of build-up that they had to cram down into one show because it took them so long to get to this point. Plus they had to kind of build up the rest of the pay-per-view, and ended up with every match being, really short. You had the submission match you're just talking about. The thing went 2 minutes, and then later on in the show we had to watch Ivory and Trish have this match that was even longer, which served absolutely no purpose. And just a lot of things on the show, Big Show and Kai and Tai, and it's just like, why waste a show putting these things on the air when you have more important matches to build up? Plus, why does Vince always wait so long to book these main events and then get in this position where he has to rush and, do 3 angles on one show just to get over a main event that really nobody wants to see?
Well, hopefully somebody wants to see it. One of the things...
Well, I shouldn't say nobody wants to see it, but I don't.
They added 2 matches for the pay-per-view, both of which we pretty much... Actually, in yesterday's show we pretty much talked about, which was the 3 Dudleys against the X Factor. God, those guys need new entrance music, don't they?
Oh, they do.
And Raven and Eddie Guerrero. Now, from a logical standpoint, the Raven, Eddie... And again, it depends on what they're doing today, but on SmackDown... But there was no plan. I don't know how can I explain this. What they did last night on Raw may end up making sense a week from today, but when they did it last night, it made no sense because those things that to make it make sense haven't even been decided yet. If Raven is to win the European title on Sunday, then the fact that Eddie pinned him clean with an Oklahoma side roll last night, I guess one could say, okay, it sort of makes sense because Raven's getting the title anyway. But I mean, the idea of where the champion, who's a heel, beats the challenger, who's a face, clean in the middle on the last major TV, depending, of course, and they could do something on SmackDown that will make that inaccurate. But on the last Raw, before the title match, it's almost like telling people, the challenger's not going to win anyway. I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter.
Well, it doesn't really. I don't think it really matters because it's like a mid-card feud that's probably not going to sell any pay-per-views. I mean, if it were the main event and the heel went over the babyface clean, that would be one thing. But Raven and Eddie Guerrero doesn't really matter.
No, but at the same time, it doesn't really build. It doesn't build any more anticipation when the challenger gets pinned clean in the middle. Without even a screw job. But you're right. I mean, as far as
Raven will probably just take the belt. I mean, I've seen him do that a lot of times before, where it doesn't really make sense for that to happen, but then the other guy ends up winning the title. So in the end, it does make sense. But as far as a build, that's not.
That wasn't the plan as of when they booked that finish, though. Mm-hmm. Just so you know, which is one of the reasons why I found it really weird. The main event, actually, the finish was changed, and I think the original finish. I think the original finish involved one of the young guys beating the old guys. Old being a term.
Big.
But whatever it was, the finish was clearly the finish that they did. Was I don't want to say they may have had many different finishes, but the finish was changed the day of the show to the conventional conservative finish, which was Austin giving Matt the stunner and then Hunter pinning him, as opposed to a kind of a more daring finish to elevate someone. And I can understand, being that the four guys who are in the pay-per-view main event. Well, actually, I take that back. There are ways you could have done it. You could have done it differently. Well, you could have had somebody pin, like Jeff or Matt, pin Austin or Hunter.
Well, yeah, it doesn't matter if one of those guys that's in the main event gets pinned.
If it's done where Undertaker sets it up, because you don't want to. If the Hardys were to actually do a move and beat Hunter or Austin, then they should be in the main event. It should be a three-way. And since the decision was made not to do that, and not to make the main event a three-way unless they changed it this morning because they had a booking meeting before SmackDown, then there is no point in confusing the issue. Couldn't they have done something like,
I guess that probably wouldn't work. It would take heat off the main event. But I was thinking something like, one of the Hardys gets a win, and then, the decision is made on TV, we'll put these guys in the main event, but instead Hunter and Austin just absolutely destroy him again, and they miss the pay-per-view, but it sets up matches with those guys down the road.
That could be done. There's no reason not to.
Well,
it sets something up for after the pay-per-view, gives an injury angle, gives them a comeback, then they get the win if they get the win. But I think the idea is that they don't want Austin or Hunter doing a job, because I'm presuming one of them is going to do a job on Sunday to lose the title. So doing a job for like a mid-card type of guys before they're doing the job for the main guys. If they were going to go over. And it's kind of a weird chess game, but I can understand not having the Hardys beat one of those guys on TV last night because of the pay-per-view and what the match is, since the Hardys are not in the pay-per-view main event. If they were going to make the pay-per-view a three-way, then you could have done it, but that wasn't the decision. Anyway,
there were two spots about the main event last night that I really hated. The first one was when Hunter and Austin are calling out Undertaker and Kane, and the Hardys come out. And they come out on the ramp, and, they're doing whatever. And it's like Hunter and Austin are looking at them like they're two mid-card geeks that they don't even care about. Like, what a threat. And then Undertaker and Kane come out, and they just look totally petrified.
And they run away.
Yeah, and they run away. And then later on in the match, which I don't even know why they did this, Jeff is, like, wrestling Christian or something, and Christian tags in Kane. And instead of being, like, the tough baby face who goes after the big guy, Jeff just runs away and tags in Undertaker. And or tags in whoever he was with, but it was just like, why have the babyface run away and look like he's scared to death of the big guys, and then why have the heels look at these little guys like they're nothing, and then look at the big guys like they're real threats. It's just another way of keeping these guys down.
Yeah, I didn't like the dynamic of those guys coming out, and it would have been one thing if those guys when those guys started laughing, I sort of saw what I thought would be a good idea, where they're laughing, and then the Hardys go in there and actually kick their ass, but I was kind of going...
Like last week?
Yeah, but I was kind of thinking that's not going to happen because they're not in the pay-per-view main event. So in that sense, it doesn't make sense to happen. But that at least would make sense for them to laugh at him. Okay, but then when Undertaker and Kane come out for that angle, you're just kind of going to the, it's kind of like, it just makes them out to be such, second-rate guys, I guess is the term.
Yeah. Yep.
Real quick, let me go through the ratings. Raw did a 5-1, Heat did a 1-7. And Livewire and Superstars both did 1-1s. The Raw main event, the 8-man tag, did a 5-6, and that was slightly above. And when I say slightly, it's like 120,000 more viewers than the submission match, which did a 5-5. Pretty, nothing new on the ratings. The same numbers last week. Just about almost identical number, actually. And let me see. I mean, grew in the first hour. There's this interesting pattern now. It grows in the first hour, which it always did, and then it curtails in the second hour, which it used to not do. And this one went pretty far down. They dropped a lot. The Trish Stratus Ivory match was a big drop. They did not do well for the XFL recap feature. Shock of shocks. And then they picked up to a 5-6 for the main event. So they did get a decent main event pickup. So anyway, that's that. Let me just see if there's any other stuff to get to. It looks like the XFL game did a 1.9 rating. It's being this is the Fast Nationals. I don't have the final Nationals. They may come out. I think they probably did just come out, but I didn't get them. The NBC did a 2-1, but we talked about this yesterday, that the first 15 minutes of the 2 hours was the NBA game, and the NBA game did like not a big number, but a bigger number than the XFL. So it kind of brought the night up for NBC, but it looks like it did about a 1.9, so, I mean, whatever that is. Lex Luger was on a sports talk show this morning. They were talking about performance-enhancing drugs in sports, and they actually never talked to Lex about doing them, other than he said that it would be really stupid for kids to do steroids, or even for kids to lift weights, because he said that Dr. James Andrews, who fixes all the wrestlers when they fall apart, in Birmingham, told him that until you're fully grown, you should not do weight training, which is really interesting, because commonly, all high school athletes are doing weight training, aren't they, Bryan?
I would think so.
Yeah, and he said
I was doing it when I was 14, but it may have stunted my growth.
Yeah, I probably started about.
I'll go for the whole 15. Deal about steroids will stunt the growth of a kid, but I don't think weight training will. Why would weight training stunt your growth?
I think if you did heavy squats while you were first growing, it might. I don't know. I mean, I think up and down.
I don't know how that would work.
When I was a kid,
just gets so big that your bone is unable to grow.
No, that the pressure on the bone, the pressure of doing stuff when you're vertical. I mean, when I was a kid, we were always told that not to do military presses and heavy squats. Too young, because it would stunt your growth. I don't know if that was an old wives' tale, but that's what we were told.
I think a lot of it is like, a lot of people say, just look at gymnasts, look at how small they are when they do this their whole life, and they're working their muscles from the age of 5 or whatever.
But they're starving too.
I'm around them all the time, and there are a lot of very tall gymnasts that lift weights, and I don't think that has anything to do with it. It's just that the ones that make it to the top level are not 6'5". Because of the natural, just as the people who make it to the top level of. Just as the people who make the top level of the NBA are not 5'3". They're naturally just tiny human beings. Yeah. Luger said that he once tried creatine, but all it did was bloat him. I thought that was quite amusing. Yes. Anyway, Lee Haney was on. All that bloating. Yeah. When he talked about his status, he said that he still got a year left on his Time Warner contract, and since the WWF is not offering big guarantees, he feels that it's in his best incentive to sit out the year and then wait for the WWF to call him when his contract is up, which is a nice way of saying what it is. Don't forget, tomorrow we're going to be live from the UPW show in Santa Ana, California. We're going to have a whole bunch of guests on throughout that show. I'm not sure who they will all be, but there's a lot of people I'm looking forward to talking to, and many of them will be on this show. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else we should bring up as far as, I don't know, as far as the show last night. I didn't think there was no particularly great wrestling. Main event was okay. Conservative finish, as we talked about. The submission match was way too short. The Trish Stratus match with Ivory was pretty hideous. And everything else, Kai and Ty, everything went as expected. RTC is continuing their losing streak. And there was supposed to be a booking meeting today to finish up the pay-per-view lineup. Nothing more was announced last night that we pretty much didn't have figured already.
Just trying to think if there's anything else. ESPN Classics is doing a special on Dan Gable. Stu Hart got out of the hospital yesterday. He needs an oxygen tank to help him with breathing, so he's in pretty rough shape. Anything else before we?
I think that's it.
Now this poll for yesterday, or today's or whatever, yesterday's poll was maybe the scariest results of a poll that I have seen. Bryan, have you gotten these results yet?
No, I haven't gotten them.
Okay. With the demise of ECW and WCW, has your interest in wrestling declined greatly, 23%, declined a little, 48%. That means 71% of the people responded saying their interest in wrestling has declined literally in the last month. Increased a little, 3%. Increased a lot, 3%. Did not make a difference, 23%.
Increased a lot?
Hey,
How can your
don't have to
interest
watch
really increase with 2 less promotions?
I will say
I guess maybe interested in seeing what they're going to do with WCW.
Yeah, could
if you
be.
didn't care about it before, and now there's a chance that WWF might be running it somewhat, with some competence.
Or you could say that because you're no longer watching these promotions, you're spending your time watching something else that that's wrestling that you find that's better. It's a possibility.
Yeah.
I mean, if nothing else, EMLL logically is certainly a lot less frustrating than WCW. And stylistically, and the matches are far better most of the time, too. Not always.
AAA with the heel refs, though. I don't know about that.
I didn't say AAA. AAA is real tough.
I was getting so angry watching the Ray de Reyes or whatever?
Ray de Reyes.
King of Kings.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was watching the finals, and Tarantes is doing the heel ref bit. And I just hate the heel refs so much. It just drives me crazy. But they had the funniest spot. The fans were getting so angry at this guy that they're throwing garbage into the ring. And he started doing the spot where he dropped down to do a count, and he would stop at 1 to clear the garbage.
Oh, to clear the ring of garbage. I've seen him do that for years.
I thought that was so awesome.
Yeah, I know. The other thing about the Ray de Reyes is that six-sided ring. The wrestlers were uncomfortable in it, and you're just visually not used to seeing, a six-sided ring. Real quick, I want to mention that the poll question that's up today has to do with last night's Raw. It's what did you think of last night's Raw? A, excellent, B, good, C, average, D, bad, E, awful. Let me see who we got up. How many guys do we have up right now? We've got Ric Flair up. Okay, Ric Flair, how you doing today?
Good, man. How are you, Dave?
Hey, I'm doing really good. Rick, I wanted to bring you on here for a number of reasons. Of course, number one, to discuss Johnny Valentine, who I would think a lot of the listeners aren't really familiar with. A lot of the older listeners clearly are. And when you started in the business, he certainly was one of the top guys.
He certainly was, and actually, I think he was probably held in as high as esteem as anybody. He was, one of the Buddy Rogers guys of that era. Pat O'Connor, Buddy Rogers, Vern Gagne, Bobo Brazil. There were a bunch of them that were big stars. Yukon Eric. And Johnny was one of them, and he, had huge notoriety in the Southwest, meaning Texas. He worked a lot in Florida for Eddie Graham. He worked a lot in New York for Vince McMahon Sr. And then, somehow, and of course he was a huge card in St. Louis for Sam Mushnick. And then I was fortunate enough to meet him when he came down south, into the Carolinas for Jim Crockett, kind of towards the end of his career. Actually, probably not the end of his career, but he probably could have wrestled another 10 years, but kind of on the wind down. He'd been everywhere else except the South, and I was fortunate enough to be here at the same time that he came down, so it was a great experience for me.
How about Jerry's measurements? Because I know he's listed as 6'4" and 250, tan, like a guy that could be a star pretty much in any era.
I would say he was 6'3", 250, maybe 6'3". He was tall, he was lean. He had really gotten himself in good shape. I'd only seen pictures of him over the years, but he'd gotten himself in real good shape because of a minor heart problem back then. Didn't stop him from having a good time, but he watched his diet, and he was, real conscious of his appearance. He was working out, and he looked great. He had that phenomenal look. Some of the guys have got it and some don't. Johnny Valentine had that look. His hair was the same. He was always kept it looking nice, and he and Ray Stevens and Buddy Rogers and guys of that era all had that same hair, and it looked great, and Johnny had a great appearance. I'm sorry, go ahead.
One thing, your style, I think maybe a lot of your style as far as the certain, believability and as far as the real hard hitting, which I guess you picked up in a lot with Wahoo and Johnny Valentine. Of course, you were telling me earlier today about when you first broke into the Carolinas, the Wahoo McDaniel, Johnny, I mean, even to this day, for the older fans, Wahoo McDaniel, Johnny Valentine matches everyone talks about. They just killed each other.
Unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it anywhere from Japan to, wherever I've been, I've never seen anything. The battles between Wahoo and Valentine, I can still see him in my mind. I can visualize them, and they were unbelievable. Not only were they brutal, they were 35, 45, and 60 minutes long. I mean, they were just phenomenal matches, and the place was sold out, and nobody moved, and two guys were bleeding, and one guy was. Just Wahoo had phenomenal timing. For a lot of the audience probably doesn't know Wahoo McDaniel, which is really sad. But aside from being a phenomenal football player, Wahoo was a tremendous performer in our business. And the one thing that Wahoo had was unlimited guts and a lot of heart. And he just wouldn't stop. That's what Valentine got out of a babyface. He made a babyface fight. Fight. Just stayed on him. He was brutal. And but if a guy wasn't willing to stand up to John, because John smacked you across the back of the neck and across the chest. A lot of guys didn't like working with Johnny because he was so stiff. But he
was it more just stiff, or was he ever really dangerous, or just really lay everything in?
There's a huge difference between the word stiff and dangerous. Mm-hmm. He wasn't suplexing anybody on top of the head. He just beat him up. He had like a half rabbit punch, and he had that kidney punch in the back, but it was just his way of laying it in. He had a style. But I can tell you right now, Wahoo McDaniel hit him back just as hard. He could stand up to anything. And he never covered up. He stayed open, and that's what, once the people realized that, he was the kind of guy that made sure that everybody walked out of the building saying wrestling was real. And Wahoo was the same way. I've seen Wahoo do everything from cut his ear to cut his shoulder, to cut his chest. He was just Wahoo was a very believable guy. And when he wrestled Valentine, when the two of them got in place, man, it was impossible. That's why they enjoyed such huge success out in Texas. They just went from Dallas to Fort Worth to San Antonio to Houston and had huge matches in front of huge crowds. And Johnny, of course, was the epitome of a challenger for the world championship and a great bad guy. And when he was over, to the point where the people started to like him, he was a great good guy. He was just phenomenal. But he never changed his style. He didn't believe in being whipped across the ring. He didn't duck elbows and cross-body people. He didn't believe in any of that. I didn't learn anything about my work except intensity from Johnny Valentine. I was a Ray Stevens guy. It was a lot easier to go upside. It was a lot easier to go upside down than it was to get hit across the back of the neck. Valentine. He was just a big rugged guy.
We got a bunch of other people who are also on the line that I wanted to bring on with you, Rick. We got Red Bastien, Larry Matisic from St. Louis, and also Les Thatcher, who all have a lot of things to say about Johnny Valentine. And before we go on with everyone, I want to get this out of the way because you were in the plane crash that ended Johnny Valentine's career. In fact, were you sitting right behind him or something? What was?
I was sitting right behind Johnny. It was a 6-passenger plane. It was a Cessna 310, the 6-place plane, and we took off from Charlotte, headed for Wilmington, North Carolina. It was a sellout crowd, and as a matter of fact, I think Red was there in Wilmington that night, and Red Bastien. Can Red hear me now, Dave?
Yes, I can hear you.
Well, Red Bastien, you're the man, buddy.
Well,
I had no idea you were going to be on the line tonight, but if anybody can tell Johnny Valentine stories, it'd be Red Bastien. And I want to go on record, ladies and gentlemen, as saying that Red Bastien is one of the greatest performers in the history of this business and a legend for a number of reasons.
Well, thank you. I emulated you all the time because you were always my idol. I remember you when I was a kid.
Well, we need to hook up one night and just tell them about Ray Stevens all night long.
Actually, we should probably do that sometime.
We need to.
It would be great.
Get more airtime, Dave. We talk about Ray for a night.
We should do that because you
there's too many stories to tell in one night, or even.
Yeah.
Gosh, man, it's good to hear your voice, man.
It's good to hear from you, Rick. And listen, I want you to come to the Cauliflower Alley Club.
Well, I would love to come. I'm not retired yet, man. I'm going to have another run.
You don't have to.
I will. us from the Rock at WrestleMania. You guys are not going to retire me yet, man.
See, that's the stigma that's attached to the Cauliflower Alley Club. Everyone thinks when you join it, you're retired, but that's not the case.
That's what Penny Manor tells me every time I see her. You're retired. Come out to the club.
Oh, God. Well,
I tell you, Red, when Dave asked me about Johnny Valentine, you're the first guy who came to mind. I can't tell the story, but it's one of the greatest stories of all time. And I can't tell either,
I know the story.
We had some great trips, man. I was telling Dave that myself and you and some of the other guys would take Johnny to the towns, and he was completely immobilized at that time from the waist down, so he did it in a wheelchair on crutches. But John loved the business, man. He just loved to travel with the guys, and he was a phenomenal man. But Red Bastille can tell you better than I can how stiff he was.
I'll tell you, you had to fight for your life. You had to fight for your life because there's no powder punches with him because he laid them in, and boy, you better get ready, be up for it.
Red, you living in Texas had seen Johnny over the last year, and could you kind of detail to everyone, ever since in 1975, Johnny was in the plane crash with Ric Flair and never walked again after that plane crash. It ended his wrestling career, and at the time he was U.S. champion. He was the top draw in the Carolinas, and in the last couple of years, his health has really deteriorated. And could you kind of bring everyone up to date on what's been happening with Johnny?
Yeah, actually, he had some internal problems and everything. His colon balls were tied up and everything like that. Aside from the fact that he couldn't walk, and then he was still training and working out with his upper body and stuff like that, doing curls and some shoulder work and all that stuff. But, he got into some complicated stuff from internal things, and he went downhill. And Ray Stern and I went over to see him one day, and this has been about, a couple of months ago now, I would say, and he's not too far from us. I'm living in Dallas, as is Ray Stern, and it's about 30 miles over there to Fort Worth, which is where he was. So we went over there, and when we walked out, we're walking down the hall, and we both had tears in our eyes. We just couldn't believe that the guy was hanging on, and he hung on, and we got in the car, and Ray says, "I don't think we'll ever see him again." And he kept on after that, kept on, and and he was just tough. He didn't want to give up, and he never did. I respect him so much because he set another precedent and took wrestling to another level. And I saw so many guys try to emulate him in my career with watching other guys wrestle, but nobody could do it. They all tried, but they couldn't do it. Am I right, Rick?
No, you're totally right. He was so unique. I tell people this, and I don't think they believe me, but you take Valentine and Ray, and a lot of us have tried to duplicate all their stuff, but nobody could. Myself or anybody else. Those were a couple of guys, and they stand out in my mind big time. As two guys that they were opposites totally in terms of their style of work, but they just were two guys who were never duplicated. A lot of guys tried, but it never really happened.
That reinforces that little saying that's often imitated but never duplicated.
Yeah. It's funny, in this day and age, Johnny's style of work would have been probably called unacceptable. He would have said he couldn't work, but he was, I guess, what you would call Ray or Red, the master of psychology, which is a word that's not used very much in our business. But Johnny would hang on to a guy and hold him down, and he'd tell him to kick his foot and move his leg and tell him to move his little finger, but if he didn't do it at the right time, Johnny just grab you and squeeze your head and just said, "Not yet," you know what I mean? And he wanted that crowd to believe the guy was down. And I'll tell you what, 20 minutes later, if they weren't familiar with his style, they did believe it.
That's sort of the boys.
Is there anybody you could compare that style to today? Maybe like a Regal, just working him over, pounding on him, a lot of mat work.
No, but I think Steve Regal, if he were, the problem is you can't wrestle like that on TV anymore. You can't wrestle like that in the arenas because they don't want you to. In terms of time, it took Johnny Valentine 20 minutes just to get. He'd look at his opponent sometimes for 10 minutes. He wouldn't even tie up. But when he tied up, he might grab the guy and not let him go for 20 minutes. I mean, Regal has got the same psychology in terms of being physical. A little bit different, and Steve does a lot of fancy stuff that Johnny would never do. But I mean, Steve's a real physical, intense guy. But it's just hard to explain. Johnny just beat you up. I mean, he hits you as hard as he could.
You better be in
Not
shape.
the mouth or in the nose or the eyes, but he hit you in the back of the neck or that side punch. I mean, he just knocked the crap out of you. Literally. It's hard to explain. A lot of guys didn't like work with him. Am I saying that right, Red?
Oh, yeah. I could remember one time here in Dallas, he's pounding the hell out of me, and so I made a big, strong comeback, and I'm punching, I'm giving it everything I got, and I look up at him, and he's smiling.
Yeah.
He loved it. He loved it. He had goosebumps on his body. I said, Jesus Christ, what am I getting into here?
The bigger the goosebumps would get.
I want to bring on Larry Matisic from St. Louis, and of course Les Thatcher, who we both had on the show many times, who are very familiar, have seen Johnny wrestle countless times. Start with Larry. Larry, St. Louis, he was one of those top 5-10 headliners of that 60s and 70s era.
Oh, absolutely. And hey guys, great to be on with Red. And what a Hall of Fame gathering this is. Believe me. Yeah, I grew up watching Johnny Valentine in the early 60s wrestle people like Buddy Rogers, Lou Thez, Fritz Von Erich, Dick the Bruiser, and Rick said something maybe about 5 minutes ago that was so true. If you ever had any doubt if wrestling was real, and remember, I was a teenage kid back then, and I wanted to believe, and I was arguing with all my classmates, hey, this stuff's real. Once they saw Valentine, nobody argued. Once he laid it in, everybody up in the top row of Kiel Auditorium in St. Louis knew Johnny had popped somebody. Yeah, he was just an incredible master of that crowd. And when I started doing ring announcing and doing the work with Sam Muchnick, I think I appreciated it even more how well he understood the psychology of what worked for Johnny Valentine, and he was awesome in there. I remember Red Bastien wrestling Buddy Austin here too, so don't get cocky now, Red.
I want to bring on Les, because Les, in almost every time Les is on the show, has been on the show, he's brought up the name Johnny Valentine as kind of an example of timing, and also as an example of a guy when I guess Les was in the Carolinas at the time when Johnny first came, and they didn't understand what he did at the beginning, and he taught them what he did, and they learned to accept it, and he ended up being the biggest drawing card in the territory.
That's right. Yeah. Exactly. Well, and he had, he was a smart guy, and I wouldn't have been able to say this when I first started in the business, but he was a smart guy. He came at the same time Wahoo did, because Johnny needed a guy he could beat up that could fight back, and Wahoo was the guy, and it worked out great for both of them because it got Wahoo. There weren't a lot of guys like this, like that Wahoo chopping the crap out of him either. I mean, the Wahoo wasn't shy about knocking you in the ground either.
Not at all.
Great for both of them. Am I saying that right, Red?
You got that right.
Can these guys hear me, David?
Yeah, we can all hear you, Les. Let's start.
Right, First of all, Nate, you're still the man, my friend.
Thanks, Les. How are you, buddy?
And I'm good, brother. And Redhead, I'd love to see you again.
Well, I'd love to see you. Come to the Cauliflower Alley Club,
I know.
my friend.
I got your message. David, I want to tell you about the Redhead. When I was a kid buying tickets, actually, I'm only 2 years younger than Red, but when I was buying tickets, he and Ray Stevens were like a tennis match. These were the original Flyers. Him and Ray would hit the ring in a tag match. Ray was Roy Shire's partner here in Cincinnati, and Red and Lou, and Red and Ray would just take to the air, man. They were quite a sight to see.
I've been grounded since then.
And Larry, of course, you're with one of the great classic promotions of all time.
Well, appreciate it. Hey, it was. I wish I knew then what I know now. Maybe I'd have been smarter and had more fun, because what a time it was. Seeing guys like Rick coming into the business, and I can still remember Rick's first matches in St. Louis, but seeing Valentine. And when you talked about Johnny working that crowd, I still remember him and Harley Race. They get in a front face lock for like 15 minutes, and after the show, you guys probably remember old Wild Bill Longson, who would sit back up on the stage with Sam. Bill coming over to me, and he's saying, "Oh, Sam was having a heart attack. He wanted me to run down and see if they were okay." They were okay. But when Johnny finally broke free, that crowd was just ready to march. He could have taken 10,000 people right down Market Street to the Arch, and they'd all followed him.
That's the truth. I was telling some of the kids here that I trained today when I found out about this. We were talking about Johnny, and I had my first match with him here at old Channel 9 on TV, and I was just a young kid, jobber then, and of course had bought tickets to see him. And came back out. We stayed probably out there 5-6 minutes for a TV match. We came back, And Les Ruffin was the booker. Les came in, hey, kid, good job. And I said, what did I do to make him mad? He said, oh, no, kid, he's not mad. That's just the way he works. So that was my first run-in with Johnny. But they're right. I've been listening to Rick. And I mean, he laid him in. Rick, Red, you guys, what I've told David before was when George Scott first brought Johnny into the Carolinas, because it was such a predominantly a tag team territory, that the people were used to seeing all the high spots from the tag teams in the action. And when they first started getting Johnny over, you'd see some of the old fans getting up and leaving in the middle of his matches, because we all know he didn't even get warmed up till 20 minutes in.
That's right.
And but then a year later, he was selling out all those same venues, right?
Yeah, and those people that walked out were back.
And bringing their friends.
Yeah, that's right.
Hey, Larry, you ought to be me trying to walk around the dressing room now trying to tell the guys about St. Louis on a Friday night. You give me $5,000 after the main event and go down to the landing and spending 10.
Yeah, I can't remember this. I remember you and me and Dickie Murdoch walking across Market Street in the blizzard one night, man.
I had to stay till Monday.
It was a different kind of town, and Les made a good point. I guess Paul Bosch, maybe in Houston.
It was a great time. You know what? It was a phenomenal time, and Johnny Valentine needs to be remembered as being one of the main guys that was part of that and helped develop it. And
yeah, Johnny was awesome. Johnny was, I grew up on him. So many people grew up on him right here.
Yeah. Oh, it was the greatest wrestling town in the world. He was a big part of it.
Yeah, the thing that nobody's mentioned was during that time after the plane crash, when he was on those crutches, I know for a couple years thereafter, would keep telling you he was coming back.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there was no way in the world you could tell him he was done.
Yeah. He had that bulldog determination for sure.
Unbelievable.
But there's some things you can't overcome.
No.
If the crash not occurred, how many years do you think he had left as like an active wrestler?
I think he could have wrestled for an unlimited period of time in the Carolinas until such time as Dusty started booking it, because Dusty booked a different style than Johnny Valentine. Mm-hmm. But I think under the George Scott era, he could have wrestled at least another 8-9 years. You know what I mean? I mean, he was over, and if Dusty had been smart, which he would have probably been at that time, he would have kept Johnny on, because by that time he would have been a huge attraction on the other side. I mean, whoever was the guy that they had to put him in the ring with, Johnny would have been the guy to match him up against, because he was. I think, Red, you were there that night that they had the U.S. tournament for his belt.
Yes.
I mean, and my God, nobody expected it. I think they stood and cheered for John Valentine for 15 minutes. I'm not sure if you were there or not, Les, but yes. I was not there, but I heard that the ovation they gave him was 15 minutes long in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I think all the guys were there for the U.S. title belt match.
Wasn't that Red? Wasn't that when you first came into the territory that time?
Yes.
I thought so.
Yeah.
And Johnny could have come back to St. Louis anytime. You know how they treated people like Gene Kiniski and Dick the Bruiser. Come in every 9-10 months, work one or two hot things, and he'd have lasted there for another 8-9 years. The loudest crowd I ever heard to this day goes back to like 71 or 72 when he won the Missouri State title from Harley Race then. And I mean, I was deafened as a ring announcer for like 2 days afterwards. I couldn't hear. I didn't know a crowd could be that loud.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was the kind of heel then that, I mean, you had to respect him. If he stayed in your territory long enough, the fans may boo him, but they had to respect what he was.
I just want to go through one thing which actually has to do with something that we talked about before these guys were on the show. This is from a guy named Kevin who goes, I'm a pre-med student, and according to all documented evidence I have come across, the skeletal structure is affected by large muscle growth in its developmental stage. So that's what he said. We got other people who wrote in and don't believe it, as a matter of fact, so I don't know. That's an interesting thought there. Let me just see.
Hey, Rick, does Reed do any weight training?
Beg pardon?
Does Reed do any weight training?
Yes. As a matter of fact, he's. This is the first year I've let him start doing some stuff with his lower back, like deadlifts and power cleans. But he's been doing bench presses, pull-ups, dips, curls, and light leg presses for about the last 2 years. So that's.
How big is he now?
Huh?
How big is he now?
He's 5'5.5", weighs 151 pounds.
Wow.
And what's his wrestling weight at right now?
Well, he started out the year at 135, but he weighed about 141 in December, and then broke his ankle. I think I told you about it, Dave. He broke his ankle, so it kind of laid him up for a while, and this is the slowest year we've had. I think it was really set him back, and he's going through that age right now where until he hits puberty, he's wrestling against kids that are 15 years old. So it was a tough year for him. He ended up, I think, 46-8, which was still a great year for him. But he never lost more than 2 matches in a year for the last 5 years. So it was hard for him, but he's growing and he's committed, and I think he understands that that he has to make a commitment one way or the other if he wants to be a Division I athlete. And he likes wrestling a lot. He likes football, so it'll play out for him. He enjoys it, and we really have a good time doing it together. So, and I used to I probably pushed him a little bit too hard a couple of years ago, but it's nothing I don't think that he hasn't realized in terms of reward. So he's doing great and having a good time, and he's healthy. And to answer your question, he is weight training. And I didn't hear the part of the show, but if you were talking about doctors, I've talked to every orthopedic surgeon in the country that knows anything about it, and they all talk about protecting the growth cradle with kids, and they shouldn't be doing squats or deadlifts and stuff like that until they're big enough to do them, because that of course affects the growth cradle. But he's grown a lot in the last year, and not just due to weightlifting, but just the fact that he's growing up to be a young man. So yeah, the answer is yes, he is.
Before we go on with Johnny Valentine, I know everybody wants to ask the question is the status of Ric Flair right now as far as going to WWF, what you've heard from Time Warner, which actually hasn't been anything, I guess, and just where everything stands right now.
It's totally in limbo. It's a real strange time right now. Where they close the doors, and we had that last Nitro in Panama City, and I don't think, I can't say for sure, but I don't think any of the guys that are contracted with the kind of deal that I have, which is, we were all real fortunate to have those deals to begin with, but the no-cut contracts, I don't think anybody's heard some from them. I think that they were hoping we'd all be calling wanting to settle to go to WWF, which, I think probably, 5 years ago I would have settled, period, and just, hope for the best. But right now, because I'm not going to Cauliflower yet, no matter how bad Red wants me to come, I'm not going until I wrestle The Rock.
Well, listen, the Cauliflower Alley Club's been going for many, many years, Rick. We can wait.
No, I just, I'd like to go, but I think, like myself and a few of the other guys, Goldberg, it's pretty hard to leave the money on the table, just to go up and my ego and everything else is I want to be there. But number one, they haven't officially made me an offer. Number two, Time Warner is telling us we can't do anything. We're getting paid by them, so that's where we stand.
Now that also would rule out just like a Japan tour or working an independent program or anything like that. You basically can't do anything unless they schedule it, right?
I can do speaking appearances, and I can do autograph sessions like for car dealerships and stuff like that, which I'll continue to do. But I can't do anything wrestling-wise.
How about charity shows?
Beg pardon?
How about charity shows?
I don't think so. I think they're looking for any reason in the world, Les, to breach the. That's what I've been told.
That's what I was afraid of, because Steamboat and I were conjuring up a Legends match for the next filming.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had you with Ricky in your corner against Bobby Eaton with Cornette in his corner.
Yeah, I would love to do that. And as a matter of fact, I'll be honest with you, if I thought that my whole thing was to sit here for 2 years and never be able to go to Vince McMahon, I would really seriously consider getting with the people that I've met in the last couple of years here in Charlotte and opening up Charlotte again. It's going to go, I think, unless another major company comes along, which is going to be difficult to establish any name recognition within the next 2 years, that the local territories, they wouldn't run it like they would in the late 80s, but you could draw 2,500, 3,000. I can name 10 towns right now you could draw those kind of numbers with Steamboat and 10 other guys that are all unemployed. You can't draw. I'm not saying 10,000 people, but 3,000 wouldn't be unrealistic at all in a lot of towns throughout the Southeast. So I think I'd do something like that, rather than venture off with a new company. I mean, there's been all kinds of opportunities right now that are out there, and that none of them are in writing yet, but I think a lot of guys are trying to explore. The guy that's promoting Australia, I think, did pretty well, didn't he, Dave? With Henning and
with the iGeneration guys?
Yeah, the guy that took Rodman and Henning and those guys, didn't they draw pretty well over there?
They did very well in Australia, but they didn't do well on pay-per-view.
Oh, okay, I didn't know.
In this country.
but the Pacific Rim is wide open, and there have been people talking about running that, and
around the world. There is a market there for around the world because the WWF is very popular on TV everywhere, and there are a lot of places where WCW, we look back, they probably could have done some real big business in Australia and England this year had they not shut down, and just like cultivated new markets. But they just, for many reasons, they just didn't do it.
I think there's a lot of promoters see pay-per-view as this big cash cow, and it really isn't unless you're Vince.
Exactly. And you've got to have a built-in audience. I mean, Vince's whole pay-per-view, unless I'm wrong, is based on the numbers that he's drawn on Monday night and Wednesday night or Thursday night. That's the audience buying the shows. You just can't go out and invent an audience because you're running a pay-per-view. Unless I'm wrong, correct me. But he's got.
I totally agree that you need real strong TV now. And also the other thing is that you need stars that the general public knows. Because, new that are on TV. Not, it's a tough. I think the business is
plus enough to have great production.
Yeah, people have the expectation because of the production. That also makes it's a more expensive business to run too.
Well, sure. Out of sight, out of mind. It's the greatest. That to me, that's the greatest expression of our business. If you're off TV for a year in this business right now, and I don't care who you are. There's a lot of you're going to lose some of the new fans that come in. I mean, I have people tell me that all the time, and it's funny because. You think when you've been on TV forever. Up until a couple of years ago, I would have believed that, but now, with the new wave of the new generation of people that watch our show, I'm sure there's always going to be the people that know who you are, but there's a lot of people that don't. I mean, I find that even here in Charlotte, as alarming as it might be. I can't get a free drink everywhere anymore, Red. It's terrible.
Hey, Nate. Since Red's president of the Cauliflower Alley Club, that's like being a booker. He might book you a farewell tour.
I know. You know what? I would like to go somewhere with Red Bastine one more time in my life for about 3 days.
Hey, the last time I took you for 3 days, I drove you to the ground. You and Greg Gagne.
That was the best. It's great hearing all these voices. I mean, I can tell you, Dave, and I won't take any more of your time like this, but with Larry Menezak, I have nothing but phenomenal memories and. The first class they ran St. Louis and Sam, and I know Dusty and I were fortunate enough to work that show that night that Sam had his retirement match, and it was just phenomenal. I mean, his retirement, we worked the title match at his retirement.
January 1st, 1982.
I worked with Brody there. I worked with Dick the Bruiser there. I mean, it's just a phenomenal time in my life that I really can't even. You can't convey those times to people that weren't there because they don't believe it. You know what I'm saying? Especially the generation now, but. The funny thing, it wasn't 50 years ago, it was just 20 years ago. That's the sad thing about it. It actually was 15 years ago. And, to have been fortunate enough to break into business when Red Bastine and Ray Stevens and Nick Bockwinkel and Dusty Rhodes and Dick Murdoch and Larry Henning were all in the same territory. Don Morocco, Jimmy Snuka, you tell me. I had a pretty good time, guys. It was a great business, but I had so much respect for those guys because actually, the list of guys I just named, there's nobody in the business who works as good as those guys right now. One thing that you brought up that just triggered something. I never knew this, but when Billy Graham first came from California to Minneapolis, yes. You set up his gym in his house, didn't you? I did, and my dad delivered his baby.
I didn't know that.
My dad delivered his wife's first child. Yeah,
wow.
It was just a great time. I mean, Wahoo was there. I mean, when I started, my eyes were bigger than Dallas, Texas. I mean, all these guys that I'd heard and seen and watched on TV, here I was, and they were all nice to me. I mean, Red and Red will laugh when I remember this story, but Red and I used to get on that plane that was 30 below zero from Flying Cloud Airport and fly up to Bismarck with Larry Heinemi, just following the road lights on the highway. I mean, remember that, Red?
Amazing, yes, of course. But let me tell you something. I just got back from Minnesota.
Wine and just hoping to land somewhere.
Rick, I just got back from Minnesota last night, and I left Bemidji, Minnesota. There was 8 inches of snow when I left there. They were spraying the plane down and everything like that. So I get out. I was up there visiting my father. Who's still living. He's 95 now, and I couldn't believe it. When I got to Minneapolis, it was just raining, and I got back here to Dallas, and the sun is out and wonderful. What a difference!
Yeah.
You know, Red, I wanted to ask you something. What happened to your nephews that were? Red had two nephews that were outstanding amateur wrestlers.
Well, yes, they were both Olympians, and one of them, the third brother, he would have been an Olympian himself, but he lost in the Olympic trials in 1 minute in overtime, and he lost the match. But however, now he is the assistant head coach at the University of Minnesota. And he's the one that goes out and recruits all the guys. And by the way, Rick, you being a little Minnesota boy, let me tell you that the Minnesota won the Nationals this year.
Oh, I know. And look, it's funny because I sponsored a guy the last 3 years, T.J. Jaworski, who lost to Kolot. You might know that name.
Yes, I do.
Kerry
Very
Kolot,
well.
yeah.
He lost to Kerry in the U.S. Open, and then in Dallas at the Olympic trials this year, he finished first and lost to Kolot in the finals at the U.S. Open. He tore his ACL, but he was a three-time national champion at Carolina.
I saw Rick. I was there. I went down and volunteered my services at the Olympic trials here in Dallas when they were here.
Oh, you're kidding. Actually, my dad passed away that weekend, or I'd have been right there. We would have seen each other.
Oh,
what do you
Red. So are you from Minnesota? Familiar as far as like Shelton Benjamin and Brock Lesnar? Because they're just starting in pro wrestling.
Yes, I'm familiar with those guys, of course.
Yeah. Any thoughts on the two of them?
I beg your pardon?
Do you have any thoughts on the two of them?
Well, I know Locke Bresner. God, he's a dynamic guy, not only wrestling wise, but personally. I mean, he's a nice man. So I've been looking forward. I hope for good things for him.
Hey, Red, you ought to see him do a shooting star press off the top rope.
Oh God.
Yeah.
He's serious about that one.
Yeah.
It's 290.
I thought I was a
290.
high flyer. I'm telling you. These guys are doing things now that I wouldn't even know. I don't even know the names of them. I have a great deal of respect for these guys that are working today. I want to tell you guys that because, first of all, you know, they think that we're from a different era, and well, we are, but I certainly respect these guys because these guys are making life-threatening moves. Every time I look at TV and I see these guys doing something, and they're high risk takers, you know, and their careers are shorter than ours was. I wrestled for 33 years, and I'm still in fairly good shape, considering, you know. But these guys, some of these guys are not going to be able to work very long because they're doing such threatening moves. My goodness.
Red, I have the same respect and same thought pattern you do, but I'm a little different. I want to see him beat Briscoe or Hodge.
Yeah. Listen, I don't even want to shake hands with Hodge.
I take my little boy to all the tournaments in Oklahoma, and Danny, of course, is always one of the guest officials, and all these wrestling coaches, high school coaches from North Carolina that in the last couple of years, they've never heard of Danny Hodge, which is almost appalling anyway. And I always do that thing. Daniel grab him by the elbow, you know how he does, and grab their hand and say hi and about break them in two. But guys, those are I just love remembering those memories of those great guys like that. God.
I want to ask all you guys because you know, Red and Les. Larry and Les. We've actually never had Red on. This is the first time Red's ever been on our show, but Larry and Les have been on many times. We have not talked to either of you, and it hasn't been that long time-wise on the air, but it's an entirely different business. And what are you know, Larry, of course, we've talked a little bit personally, but what are your thoughts as far as you know, the business today?
Go ahead, Les. Because I dumped that on you.
You're on, Les.
Red, I can hear Red laughing. He said, "Yeah, go ahead, Thatcher. Put your foot in your mouth." You know, I'll tell you the truth. I feel more comfortable with this situation than with what was proposed, you know, with the Fusette Bischoff fight. And Dave, I've told you this, you know, you and I talked off the air about this. You know, Eric built Nitro and the NWO and the whole thing and took WCW to its zenith. There's no two ways about that. But I always felt that some of his things were also created. He was the architect for the big loss last year. And I just didn't feel that, for whatever reason, you know, it was a gut feeling, obviously, because I had nothing to found it on, but that those guys were going to be able to pull this thing out of the barrel and make it competitive again. And I think with Vince and, you know, Shane, well, you know, Vince doesn't like to lose. He's proud of, you know, he's kind of got more the old school attitude that the four of us would have. And he takes pride in his product and pride in his craft. And I think in that respect, it's good for the industry. I think they will create something competitive, and they'll be able to approach it from an entirely different standpoint than we've ever been able to do before.
It's an interesting point, and lesson. Some of the people that have talked to me lately have actually been talking about the submission or shoot fighting stuff, and Dave and I have talked about this too. How in many ways that type of whatever competition is in some ways like wrestling was in the 70s, where you could almost build to a big show. You could the business part of it, though. Man, some of these people are just. I'm talking to one guy, and I keep explaining to him, if you have a nut this big, and you only take in this much money, who's going to make up the difference? They don't seem to understand that. So I'm a little discouraged on that point of view. And as far as Rick said too, about individual towns trying to come back. God knows I keep thinking in that dream again about St. Louis and recognizing how still in this town they recognize all these great names and kind of want to, in some cases, turn their heads at what wrestling is today. And Rick, you were on the shows that came to the TWA Dome, so you know. And I talked to Zane Bresloff before this, and maybe this is talking out of school, because I kind of gave Zane the tip to who to talk to at the TWA Dome. Then they kind of ignored me, which is fine. That's cool. That's the way the business goes. But nonetheless, I told Dave at the time, they're going to come in the first time, they're going to draw a hell of a house. They're going to come in the second time, they're going to draw half a house, and the third time they're going to die. What happened, Rick?
They died.
They died. Because they.
You know what was amazing when you bring that up? The first time, because the first time you guys went to Rick, you went to the TWA Dome.
Yeah.
There's like 30,000 people in the worst possible weather. I mean, it would have drawn a lot more. I mean, it was the worst. And you came in there and you talked about Sam Mushnick and Bruiser Brody, and the whole crowd reacted. And then you came back the third or fourth time. It was the one that drew really poorly, like 5,000 people at that big dome. And you talked about those same guys, and the crowd was quiet. And what it told me, and it told everyone, was all those people came out the first time, and they didn't get the product that they remembered. And, by the time you guys had come back, this was, during as the promotion was going down, your audience, the audience that was left was the younger fans. And it was really sad that, when the name Sam Mushnick was thrown around, and I think it was maybe in a program you did with Russo, I'm not sure, I don't remember offhand, and it was kind of like, wow, they didn't know the name so much.
Yeah, well, guys, the problem is, I wish I could just isolate this conversation around St. Louis. Unfortunately, guys, I've seen it, and I'm not saying by any means that Charlotte and Greensboro were St. Louis or Atlanta was St. Louis.
But they were great towns, Rick.
I think the Crockett's felt that Greensboro was St. Louis. I think a lot of people that wrestled down here that never went to St. Louis felt like Greensboro was, because they held 16,000 people, and it was sold out, every week or every third week. And, the problem is we shot ourselves in the foot in every market we went to, because ultimately we had a lot of great names and some great players and some great talent, but we did not deliver the product. And the showbiz part of it, carried us for a long time, but we got an attitude and we just didn't deliver. And it's, we all know. I mean, I'm talking to everybody that's in the business now. I'm talking to you guys, but you've got to deliver at some point in time on what you're trying to bring to the table. If you don't, then you fall short. And we just I don't know how we crossed our wires, because we were in a position to really stay predominantly on top for a long time, or certainly compete. And it's funny, Vince cut down the showbiz and he started wrestling harder. And, to me, I used to, when I was up there in 91, I said that he and Pat Patterson and I we used to not jokingly kid around. I said, Pat, Hogan's gone. You can't give him a 5-minute match anymore. If Bret Hart's going to be your champion or I'm going to be your champion, you got to wrestle 15, 20 minutes in these house shows. I mean, I laughed about it with Hogan. We've all talked about it. But, I mean, the business has got to change based around the talent that's available. And when you've got guys like Austin and Rock in that, I mean, I tell my son this all the time. When those kids are out there for 15 minutes, they're working their ass off. They don't slow down. They're in shape, number one. And number two, even though it might not be the style that Red Bastien and Ric Flair wrestle or Les Thatcher, they're working their ass off and they're giving them a wrestling match. And some of them are damn good matches. But they're doing it for 20 and 30 minutes. And that's where Vince got smart. He started giving the fans all the showbiz and good wrestling.
And Rick,
especially in the pay-per-views.
And don't you think, Rick, that
yes,
he also supported it? I mean, because Ross was able to call a match. I mean, when I called a match with you, I called it like I was calling the Cardinals versus the Cubs.
And that's what Ross says, basically.
That's what Ross does. Nothing different, but he's providing you
those kind of matches.
Yeah, and he's got the guys who can work, and he's trying to support what you're doing in the ring as opposed to going off on some other tangent.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a mix.
Talk about the main event.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at some point in time, you just got to deliver, and we worked for a while, and I can't really pinpoint anything that turned it around, but we just stopped giving them what we promised them. And I mean, you could look at the two shows, and even though maybe at that point Steve Austin wasn't as big as Hulk Hogan, I mean, you could see that it wasn't because McMahon wasn't trying to get him there. I mean, week after week, but they had him out there for 15 minutes wrestling every night. I mean, in tough, hard matches where the guys weren't stopping to grab their breaths. You know, they just kept rolling. And I mean, I watched this Rock. I told Arn Anderson, and I said, you watch. Everybody said when Austin went down, I said, this kid right here is going to carry the load. You watch. Arn said, nah, I never catch up to Austin. It was just a friendly, conversation because he hadn't seen The Rock that much. I was sitting home. I was doing that lawsuit was when the company had me sitting home, and I'm watching this kid every week, and I was thinking, and sure enough, man, he went to another level. But God, they have him out there making 4 or 5 comebacks, against 3 guys in 10 minutes. You got to be in shape to do that. Mm-hmm. And that's going back to the Valentine thing. He made the guys fight and fight and fight, and that's what those babyfaces are doing. Vince has surrounded himself with a lot of guys that can bump around for the babyfaces, and the babyfaces are in shape to give them the bumps. And they're wrestling their butt off. I mean, again, I'm not saying it's what Vern Gagne and Red Bastien would call a great wrestling match, or Ray Stevens, but to me, it's a great wrestling match because they're doing.
Well, it's a great. If the people react to it like it's a great match and the guys are busting their ass,
Yeah, exactly.
It's a different style.
It's not Jack and Dory, but it's great, and who cares? That's one thing I've learned. I can't compare myself in Steamboat, to The Rock and Austin because that's a different time. In Ric Flair's mind, I want to think that Steamboat and I had a better match, but you know what? We never drew 6 million people.
Different way to deliver the product at that time.
I got a question, Rick, as far as I wouldn't say that this is the turning point.
Those guys are due. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay. I wouldn't say that this was the turning point, but I remember when this happened a little over a year ago. We were doing the show. It was when Benoit Malenko and Saturn and Eddie Guerrero left, and I just thought in hindsight that was going to be a real big deal because it gave them a mid-card and gave them, Benoit goes out there on every pay-per-view, and you get a great match. And even though he's been in 1 or 2 main events, but you always get that great match, and that was something, with Malenko as well, that you take away from your product, and all of a sudden you were down 2 good matches, they were up 2 good matches, and there was a certain balance of power when it came to the wrestling side of it that really shifted when those guys left.
No, I wasn't there, Dave. That's another time that I was off. Can't remember what the situation was then, but it was, I wasn't there that night, but, it was a huge loss. I mean, I don't care. They can say, about size or weight, or they're not going to be projected as being the main event guys. Those guys are 4 great workers. And when 4 great workers walk out the door, following Jericho, who'd already gone, that was made 5. And to me, Benoit wrestles as big as anybody does. I don't care whether he's 5'10" or 6'5". Benoit wrestles as big and tough as anybody. Benoit is as stiff as Valentine. Trust me.
Accomplished too.
He's got those little hands, man. He'll knock your shoulder off. But on top of that, he's a great worker, and to lose those kind of guys was just a huge, huge mistake. And it was something that could have been worked out had people, and this is one of the problems, that had people that know anything about wrestling, been running a situation. I mean, you just can't ask 10 different people for an opinion. You've got to be able to make a decision sometimes, in this business especially. That's what Vince does. I assure you, we all know that Vince has people around him that help make decisions, but ultimately, I would be very surprised if he doesn't close his eyes in a private moment and make important decisions based on what he thinks.
Rick, and it's a key thing, even back 30 years ago to Sam Muchnick, in the end, Pat O'Connor may have done this, or Harley may have done that.
Yeah.
In the end, there was a boss, and Dave and I have talked about this a lot privately, too, going back to 89, because Jim Hurd approached me back then about coming with with you guys. And I remember meeting with Hurd and Jack Petrick, and I asked them, I said, what do you guys want out of this? I mean, do you want a TV show? Do you want a wrestling promotion? I mean, there's 2 different things here. They couldn't give me an answer. And I don't think that anybody that followed up in the next 12 years really had that answer. And pretty soon there was no boss. There was no philosophy about the promotion.
Let me tell you guys,
it was just loose.
If my book ever gets published, I mean, I've been there since the day we walked in the door with Jack Petrick, and I flew out. I remember I took Jack Petrick to meet. I mean, I can tell a lot of stories, not that it made any difference, but I took Jack to meet Roddy Piper. I was trying to recruit Piper, who was kind of on the outs with Vince at that time, and I mean, there was just the door was there, but it was again. And you've all heard the story with the Braves when they were run by the Turner people and Turner TV people for years, floundered. When they hired Bobby Cox, they became a baseball team.
Yeah.
And that's what's happened. I mean, with the exception of Bill, who came in, and Bill didn't understand that, Bill was just not the diplomat they needed to be.
It's Bill Watts we're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, Bill knew a lot about wrestling, but Bill, was the Bill Watts, and he wasn't used to, Bill wanted to wear a Zubaz and a sweatshirt and come in the office down there, and I knew that wasn't going to happen in corporate America because I've been there. I mean, I think Bill is a wrestling guy, and I know for a fact he learned a lot about finishes from Eddie Graham. I think Red can agree with me on that.
I can verify that.
He had a good attitude, but Bill was used to running something about 1/millionth the size, and having total control. And then Bill didn't want any input, and it just had to be a happy medium. I mean, I can go on, but they just have never been able to get the North and the South Tower on the same page, whether it be, from the management side to the marketing side to the wrestling side to the contract side. It's always been off balance. And as a result, it's something I think we all thought could happen, but never thought it would. And the reason it has is because Ted Turner personally is so far removed from the product now that, Ted has nothing to say about it. I'm sure, I've even heard twice now that if Ted had known about it, he would have tried to block it, but he didn't even know about it.
But Ted didn't. Ted, he's pretty much out of the loop too.
Yeah, totally. I mean, he's one of the reasons we've ever been. When Eric went trying to get Nitro put on TNT, everybody blocked it except Ted said, "Hey, we'll give it a try." But Ted.
Do you think Ted could have even saved it now if he'd wanted to, though?
I don't know. Could you?
The problem was with the AOL, and you know what? If the company didn't have such a bad money year.
Yeah.
I think it would have been totally different, but it was it's a combination of things. It's like AOL comes in with no emotional ties to wrestling and no, there are these businessmen who don't know that wrestling peaks and goes up and down, and also that the reason it lost so much money was because it was so horribly mismanaged. But it's not like it inherently has to lose that much money, and not that one or two big stars in a hot run, you can actually turn it around. 60 million is hard one to turn around, but you know what I'm saying. It was only 2 years away from being profitable in the other direction, but they didn't understand those ups and downs, and they just saw this is a money losing thing. We don't want it, and that was the timing. You had your bad year at the same time of the merger. And that was the story.
Well, in my opinion, Dave, the truth had ever been known, and I'm sure it's known now. But if the truth were ever known about the amount of money that went out those doors to people that never ever performed 1 minute.
Rick, there's one thing, and you know most of those guys, and I know a lot of those guys, and I do have to say the one thing that used to bother me was there came a time there that the guys forgot what being a professional wrestler was, and I'm not saying all of them because there's huge exceptions to what I'm saying, but I know, where guys would think that going on the road was not a part of their job description. And that's, and then they would start coming up with excuses not to go on the road because the top guys would get away with not going. So then the middle guys would go, well, if they can, I can't. And then they would complain, I've got to go on the road 3 days this weekend. And I'm thinking, you're making $500,000 a year. You got to go on the road 3 days this weekend. That's part of the job description.
Yeah, but Dave, I agree with you in that respect. But the problem is, and everybody knows this, that buck stops at the management level. If the first guy doesn't show up, whenever it was, whatever day, if he gets fired, then that sends a message. If the first guy doesn't show up the first time, and the boss says, well, that's okay, it won't happen again.
I think the problem was you just had top guys doing it, and since it was in the middle of a wrestling war, you had people thinking, hey, if we fire this top guy, he'll just be on Vince's TV Monday.
Exactly.
And,
but you can't think
what
that
do we
way.
get out of that?
You can't think that way.
It's just, and I'll tell you something else, Dean. We just let it get to the point where we thought we were so high and so untouchable. I mean, when I say we, because I was part of it too, that, they lost touch with reality. You know what I'm saying? We just lost touch with reality. McMahon, in turn, who was getting the crap beat out of him, and everybody knows how bad he did too. I mean, there were a lot of things going on in his life personally and business-wise. But if you've been around him, you know how smart he is. I could see what he was doing week after week after week. And instead of focusing on making our product better, well, I think we were just totally concerned all the time and trying to compete with his product. And when that, didn't make any sense.
Yeah, the other thing is, then you had everyone trying to play his game under his rules, and you can never win that way.
You can't be a copy of what's the original.
Yeah, you can't. That's it. I was going to say, we can all bleach our hair blonde and go woo, but we're not Ric Flair.
Exactly. Exactly. And not to make Sam a god here in St. Louis, but I mean, we knew in St. Louis that other towns ran differently than we did, and Sam didn't care. This is what we do. We believe in it. We do it the best way we can. And like Rick said, somewhere in there that got lost. Well, Vince did this, so we got to do that. No, just do what you're doing, what you do best with the talent you got, and let's have a boss who can make that decision, go that direction, stay the course, and you'll find your audience.
Yeah, I can remember Larry. You'll like this because I remember I probably asked Larry. The first night I ever with Dick the Bruiser, I didn't even know Dick the Bruiser.
He didn't know you either, Rick.
But you sure took care of him.
Everybody was there, and they kept saying, "Where's the Bruiser?" And Larry, I think what Larry said to me, he'll probably be here about 10 minutes for the match.
Yeah.
But he was Dick the Bruiser. That was acceptable. I mean, he was such a commodity. Not only then, but had been such a big star throughout the years that. Sam allowed him to do what he wanted to do, and he didn't want to hang around the young guy. He came walking in, 10 minutes before the match, put his shoes on, and went, "Yeah, dude," he just out the door he went. But that was Dick the Bruiser. But that was the exception because the guy was a superb. I mean, a huge draw, number one, and at that point, just a huge card in St. Louis.
And he never failed to deliver when it came time.
So, but Rick, what you're saying about what just happened with WCW in the last few years, and I think Larry and Red would concur.
It's been happening for 11 years. It's just been happening since 1989. It's a problem, Les.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is we've all seen it happen. All four of us have been involved, major or minor ways with booking, and I think you when you get to the top, and sometimes the booker thinks. Of course, it's always, can you top this? And obviously, at some point, you cannot. But I think sometimes the booker thinks he's on such a roll that he can't make a mistake. And I think we've all seen territories, do a complete turnaround on that note.
Yeah, well, I want to get to. We only have one free line because we have everyone up here. But I want to get to Travis, who's been holding for a long, long time. What's been going on?
Hey, how you doing, Dave?
Doing really good.
Yeah, I want to talk about Triple H today.
Okay.
Do you think Triple H is going to start beefing with Austin anytime soon and go for the world belt?
At some point, for sure.
Yeah,
I mean, the timetable, I don't know. I don't think anyone knows the timetable exactly, although I think it would make sense for SummerSlam.
Yeah. And what's going on with Shawn Michaels?
Nothing. I mean, that's the truth.
You don't think he's going to come back anytime soon?
He had his chance, and, he had his chance, and he didn't show up in shape, and they don't even, I talk to people there all the time. I mean, the name Shawn Michaels, it comes up on this show. It never comes up in my conversations with anyone there. It's almost like he came, I mean, we talked about it a lot before he got there. Then after that thing happened, it's like no one brings it up. I mean, they may, Shawn Michaels, there'll come a day where he'll be brought back and they'll give him another chance just because of who he is, but it may not be that soon.
It'll be a while.
Yeah, I heard that Shawn Michaels and Triple H aren't friends anymore or something like that.
That I don't know. I mean, it's business. They're friends when they need to be friends, and I mean, they're not. I'm sure
didn't pick up for him or something and go.
Well, they were going to work a program, or maybe not necessarily a program, but they were going to work a match, and it took the match away, and so they had to change some things. So I'm sure that's going to lead to frustration. I mean, Triple H is the reason he lost clean at WrestleMania was because the Shawn Michaels finish he was supposed to be involved with got canceled because Shawn wasn't. They felt that Shawn disrespected their company by showing up the way he did when he came in right before WrestleMania.
Yeah. Well, all right. Thanks, Dave.
Okay, you're very welcome.
All right, bye.
One thing, Larry, I wanted to bring up because Rick brought up a little bit earlier. There in St. Louis, this is so weird to say, and no one will really understand what we're talking about unless they grew up in that era. But you had whatever it was. I remember when Sam died, we talked about this. There was 3 no-shows in the history of 30 years of main events, as ridiculous as this sounds, and one of them was One of them was Johnny and Johnny Valentine. And could you tell a little bit about? I mean, it's like a no-show in the main event. People wouldn't blink their eyes at. But what was the reaction like in the office? You know, when you found out, I guess it was like probably a day or two before the big card, he was in the main event.
Found out the night of his March 16th, 1973. I looked it up, so don't think it's my memory. I did look it up because I figured it'd probably come up. March 16th, 1963, Johnny was supposed to work with Terry Funk for the Missouri title. They had a hot thing on TV. And the night before, Sam called like about 11 o'clock at night, and I guess Johnny had just been hospitalized in Houston. I guess when he first had the heart problems. And, I mean, we went into panic. I mean, Sam got a hold of Gene Kiniski, I guess, by around midnight. Gene was on a flight like at 1 a.m. out of Blaine, Washington to here. I was calling, literally I called 20 radio stations that night. I was on the air like constantly from midnight till 3 a.m. talking about this thing. Then we started all over again at 8 o'clock in the morning. We had signs up everywhere. It was in the Post-Dispatch. It was in the Globe-Democrat. We still sold out, and they bought it because one time in, that's really the only time when I worked for Sam that we ever had a change in main event. So that's one time in 20 years that we had a change in main event. But the thing, I
want to bring that up, that what you did, and the fact is that, anyone in that town, anyone in that city knew that you played fair with them, that you were in hiding from them. It wasn't one of those things where you come to the building and all of a sudden, I'm not going to mention names, but just say, 3 or 4 of the top guys aren't there. There's no explanation given to the city. You know what I mean? In the ring, there's no suitable replacement. The matches just get canceled. Yeah, and that's what ended up happening at the end with WCW.
And that's exactly true, yeah, because I went in the ring that night. We offered refunds. We may have done, I don't remember the exact number, we may have refunded 6 tickets or something. I mean, and then the amazing thing of that all was, and you talk about also the dedication of the talent from that era, be it a Johnny Valentine or a Gene Kiniski or whomever. By the time I got to the office the next morning, which was around 9 a.m., Kiniski was sitting in the office waiting for me. And he hadn't left Blaine, Washington at like midnight, 1 a.m. his time. So you figure that one out. I mean, we didn't have to worry about the main event because Gene was there. And, yeah, it was just a different reaction to the product here in town. I mean, yeah, if we had a substitution, and Rick and Red, too, I'm sure before I was ever involved with Sam, Red Bastien can remember these days, and Les can, too, because he was at Wrestling at the Chase. If there ever had to be a substitution, Sam would have had a conniption fit.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, ask Red and Rick in their careers how many shows they never made other than because of a serious injury. And I bet you they'll tell you they made every damn one of them.
Probably with some serious injuries.
Yeah, always. Everybody worked.
Yeah, exactly. We all had
the reason is because if you didn't work, you didn't get paid.
Well, that's a good reason. And okay, that's a good question, and I throw it out to Rick because he was there. Did the guaranteed contracts hurt?
Well, I have to tell you honestly, guys, I think that I'm really in favor of the guaranteed contracts. When I was fortunate enough and am fortunate enough to be part of that, but you see, the guaranteed contracts are really one of the problems, and I wouldn't even bring this up, but it was such an issue in the late 70s and early 80s. Is we're the only athletes in the world, and I will always refer to us as athletes that don't have health insurance. We don't have a retirement or a pension plan. We don't have any of the union benefits. Not that the union's the word, but we don't have anything like that in place, and that's one of the reasons I tell people all the time that this is the most insensitive business in the world. I mean, 5 or 6 guys have died in the last 3 years, and you know what? They play their name on TV on Monday or Wednesday, the next week they're forgotten. And that's just how this business is. True. And when you talk about it, the kid asked about friends and that. I mean, you're lucky if you have 4 or 5 acquaintances, period. And if you have a couple friends, it's really a miraculous deal because everybody wants to be the man. And there's no way that, of course, with the money that's available now, a lot more guys come out, in better shape financially at the end of their career. But it's an insensitive business, and the
No, we're losing Rick. Okay,
battery.
Yeah, I think his cell phone ran out.
Okay.
One thing,
Dave, let me interrupt here just for a minute. You're going to lose me too. You're going to lose me too because I got some things I have to do here. So,
okay, Red, I want to thank you so much, Red, for joining the show.
Yeah, let me just mention one thing before I go, and it's pertaining again to the Cauliflower Alley Club. But we're going to honor a young man this coming February in Las Vegas, and he's a national champion, and he has no feet. And
oh my God! I just wrote about him. I wrote a story about him last night.
Nick Ackerman, right?
Yeah, he won the Division III Nationals and he was with no feet. It's the most unbelievable story I think I've almost ever read in wrestling.
It's a phenomenal thing, and we're going to honor him. But I'd just like to read the last paragraph. There was an article in the USA Today on March the 29th, and he was being interviewed, and a reporter asked him about being disabled. This is his response. Don't call me disabled. He was asked what he'd prefer. He says, oh, I don't know. Call me national champ if you want. What a retort. I thought it was great. But anyway, I'm going to excuse myself, gentlemen. It's been nice talking to you guys again, and makes me feel good to think that someone remembered me for a change.
You're a great tribute to the business, my friend. You're a class act.
All right, guys. Take care.
Okay, thanks a bunch, Fred. We still got Les Thatcher and Larry Madison. Hopefully we can get Ric Flair back on. I'm going to
Dave, one quick thing on back what Rick was talking about, and Les would probably understand a lot of this stuff too. Rick was right about this being an incredibly insensitive business, and maybe I guess what I was referring to is more how people abused those contracts, as opposed to that there was a need to do something if guys were hurt, or if guys they had to have something, didn't they, Les? I mean, there had to be a middle ground in there somewhere.
There's a happy medium. You know, one of the things, I don't know that I blame it on the management and not the contracts. You know, a lot of people, because Vince did one thing and WCW did another thing, and Vince was more successful, therefore Vince's way is the only way, and that's not necessarily the case. And a couple of examples is that in the 80s, Crockett was the first one to do guaranteed contracts because he had to keep his talent from going to Vince, and Vince was paying them basically, no one had a guarantee except for maybe Hogan in the 80s in the WWF, although they made a lot of money because they had the opportunities working in house shows and everything. The Crockett wrestlers in that era worked much harder than the McMahon wrestlers just because that was what the fans demanded and that's what the promotion demanded. Now, what happened, I think, with the WCW, and it was bad. I think it was bad management because we can look at Japan; those guys all get guaranteed contracts, and you don't see. I mean, those guys, if, they break their finger, they wrestle because it's just how they're, you know what I'm saying?
Sure. Mm-hmm. And I think another thing too is you got to look at the individual, because I think there's guys this era or our era, it doesn't matter, who you can give them $1 million a minute and they're still going out there and bust their hump because simply they take pride in what they do, and that's their mindset.
Like, Austin's a perfect example. Austin can get by doing half of what he does.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, he's over. He'll always be over. He's stone cold. But, I mean, I remember every pay-per-view when you watch him. I mean, he may not always have a great match. He usually does. But even when he doesn't, it's not because of lack of effort.
No, it's not. Yeah. Well, if you look at that whole top tier of guys in WWF currently.
Yeah. Oh, you're right, all of them.
Yeah, exactly.
And they would have made it in the 70s.
Work ethic. And I think that's part of it, too, because, we can talk about baseball or basketball. I mean, what's the average NBA player? $6 million or something? I mean, that's... and there are guys that are lackadaisical there, obviously, but there's also guys that go out there and kill themselves.
There are Johnny Valentines. There are Johnny Valentines who go out there and they're going to perform, like Les said, because they got pride and it matters to them.
Well, I think, and back to why we're on this particular show to begin with Valentine, I mentioned that, my first match with him, I was just I'd only been in the business a couple of years and was still just, strictly a jobber. Or a carpenter, as they called him then. But, I mean, the point was, we talked about how rough he was. Well, if you thought he was rough, if you didn't fight back, just think how rough he might have gotten. Mm-hmm. Or if you didn't get up off your dead butt and move, then you were going to get even a heavier dose. I mean, you got out there and worked with those guys, or you got out of the way, one of the two.
I remember Dick Murdoch telling me once when he started out in the business, he said, man, I spent like 4 or 5 months up in Kansas City. He said, and I worked with Geigel and O'Connor every night. He says, I had no skin on my back. He says, I learned I had to move.
Yeah.
I had no skin left on my back because I was on it every night.
But, everybody talks about those guys, being tough on you, and they were if you didn't respond. Mm-hmm. But I remember working with Geigel as a young man, too, and some of those guys. And if you were out there busting your hump and they believed you were sincere, they would help you.
Yeah.
And make you look good. I mean, I was surprised sometimes I'd work with guys of that caliber and I think, my God, I'm not this good. How did this happen? But
I want to start running taking some calls, okay?
All right, go ahead.
We'll go with Hector first. Hector, what's up?
Hello, yes. Unfortunately, I never got to see Johnny Valentine wrestle, but I want to know, did Greg Valentine wrestle anything like his father?
Similar style.
Yeah,
how would you compare the two? Larry,
Yeah.
you saw Greg and Johnny, and so did, actually, Les, you did too. As far as
Yeah, Greg was similar, just not as I would think, and of course Les was in the ring with him, so he could speak better to this than I could. Johnny was as tough as they come. Greg was tough, but Johnny was in a kind of a separate league. He was up there.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, Johnny was in a class all by himself. I mean,
Greg
I
was a
think
good
so.
kid, though.
You know, even Fez, if you read Hooker, mentions how tough and resilient Johnny Valentine was.
Hey, and don't forget, April 24th, this is Lou Thesz' birthday today.
Is that right?
Yep. This is
Oh,
Lou's
my
birthday.
goodness, great.
wow, so it'd be 86? No,
Wow.
85. 85.
Dave,
Wow.
one time you mentioned a story about Greg Valentine and his father that something about the name. I don't remember what it was, that they didn't want to be associated because Johnny Valentine.
Larry knows this one because Larry was in the middle of it when they brought Greg in as Johnny's son, and Johnny got upset.
When he first came in in '71, we the first program we billed Greg as Johnny's son, and the next day Sam called me in and he was almost apologetic. He says, "Well, we're right." He says, "But you know, Johnny's put a lot of time in this business and he's really sensitive to this, and we're going to call him Johnny's brother." So for about a year and a half, Johnny and Greg were brothers here. In fact, they won a battle royal together once, where in theory was the Valentine brothers won the battle royal here in St. Louis. Then sometime around after Johnny had the heart attack, he kind of acknowledged Greg. Of course, Greg was out of St. Louis. He wrestled here when he first started out, like 71, 72. Then he wasn't back again until 80, 81. By then, you know, Johnny was out of the business.
Yeah, Les,
Yes.
could there be a possible memorial show for Valentine?
Well, you know, we'll certainly, you know, we're doing a filming show in August this year. But we certainly will acknowledge Johnny. There's no two ways about that. I think what Ric Flair said earlier on the show is we all have to realize we need to respect this man, and it's true. He was quite a pioneer and quite a stand-up guy in this industry.
All right.
Let's go to Carlo. Carlo, you're up next. Hello, Carlo. Carlo, you up?
Yeah, how you doing?
Doing really good.
I didn't get a chance to, it was kind of before my time, Johnny Valentine, but, I was just wondering, where do you think he would be today if he was wrestling?
It's a totally different world, and it's a totally different style. I mean, his style is absolutely not what these guys do. I mean, you know, would he have adapted? I mean, he was a big guy. He looked good. You know, and it's you know, it's a different kind of era anyway, but, you know, he had a physical presence that would have carried over. I mean, as a kid, you know, Johnny Valentine was, I mean, he was one of those guys that you saw on the cover of a magazine or you saw in an arena, and he had a certain look. He looked like a star. I mean, I was a little kid watching Johnny Valentine in Florida, and he had an aura that, you know, I mean, I would say more than even Dusty Rhodes, more than anyone in that territory at the time, except for maybe Jack Briscoe, and only because Jack Briscoe had this certain thing where when you watched Jack Briscoe, you just knew that he was an athlete above the level of everybody else. Johnny was, so that aspect of it he had. I mean, as far as the ring style, I mean, holding a guy in a hold for 15 minutes, that wouldn't fly today. But,
you could see in Johnny's eyes how serious he was. You knew he was serious. And I think every fan knew that. Anybody who saw him going down the aisle and may have been thinking, hey, I'm going to go up and take a pop at that guy. When they got close, they looked and they said, nah, I don't think I am going to take a pop at that guy.
But, I mean, if we talk about, like, the physicalness and everything, I mean, you know, it's Chris Benoit and 5 inches taller.
I think physically he could have done it.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, that's not to say he wouldn't have been, you know, a bigger star and made tons more money now. You don't really know. I mean, everything in wrestling, and one thing I've learned is it's all timing, being in the right place at the right time. I mean, and having the light shine on you. It's so much of it's luck, a lot of it's skill, but a lot of it's luck.
I remember reading on the internet that Greg Valentine and Ric Flair were a tag team, that they used a move similar to Demolition or the Midnight Express, and the guy said they invented that move. Is that true?
I don't know.
I was there.
Rick's not here.
What move were we talking about?
Is it like one guy holds the other guy and the other guy doesn't he drop off the top? Yeah, Les, you were around announcing it, or just around.
They may have done that, but it doesn't jump out at me that they invented it or that was something that started there. I'd be hard pressed to tell you. There was, that was Rick's talking about good times in our lives. My God, that was one of the best. I think there was so much good talent in that territory, and if you couldn't learn in that environment, you would never learn. It was, but they were a good team together. I remember Greg trying to match Rick on the mic and trying to talk loud and everything. And I know he and I talking, and I said, just be Greg Valentine. The people have to shift gears and listen to you, because Rick is one style and you're another. And that was one of the things that I enjoyed most at that point, because I was doing a lot of those interviews, was watching these guys develop and grow as workers. Flair, Steamboat, Greg.
You had an incredible
young guys.
talent.
Tony Atlas was there at the time. Tiger Conway Jr., Steve Kern. A lot of young guys developed in that atmosphere. And like I say, there's no way not to. I mean, you had to be totally inept not to learn in that group of guys.
I believe Johnny was 72 years old, and he was an absolute legend in the business. I mean, I remember, we talked about this before. When I was a kid, it was, right up there with, your top 10 names, I guess, in the business. Ric Flair mentioned them, like with Bruno Sammartino, the Funks, Jack Briscoe, Johnny Valentine, Kaniski probably was up there still.
Buddy Rogers.
Buddy Rogers was a few years earlier.
Yeah.
But, Buddy Rogers, of course.
Well, Valentine and Rogers did work against each other a lot in the late 50s and early 60s.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. In fact, they helped turn St. Louis around when Sam Kenny had a down period around 60, 61. He went to probably the first TV angle on Wrestling at the Chase might have been Valentine and Rogers. Remember Bill Dromo?
Sure.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay, Bill Dromo was supposedly Johnny's protege, and Rogers put him out with a figure-4 leg lock and kept it on after the match, and Johnny came to the ring, which they'd never seen before in St. Louis. And needless to say, I mean, they popped it. And I don't know if Valentine did a good interview, and I was probably 11 or 12 years old watching this, but I know, boy, it had a tremendous impact, because when Valentine came down and he laid about he probably hit Rogers 3 times, but that crowd just exploded. Valentine was an awesome figure.
Something I don't think anybody's mentioned about Johnny is his sense of humor. Of course, most of a lot of the ribs you couldn't tell on the air.
Yeah. I mean, I tell you, on the Johnny Valentine ribs, I mean, he was a feared guy, though. I mean, it was almost like a Dynamite Kid thing, where it's like there's a dark side there.
Well, you mentioned Roger. Now, this is one that a couple of the old timers, I don't recall who now, told me, and this happened here in this territory when Johnny and Buddy were both working for Al Haft. The office is up in Reynoldsburg, outside of Columbus, and what set this thing off was Valentine had a new tailor-made suit and had worn it to the matches, was bragging about it. He was in the main event. Rogers like the semifinal or whatever the case was. Anyway, he was on before Johnny. So anyway, while Johnny's in the ring, Buddy sits down with a razor blade and cuts most of the seams in the pants and the jacket. So that when Johnny comes out, gets a shower, and starts to dress, his pants and his jacket start to come apart in his hands. So finally, I guess he figures out that it's Buddy. And, of course, Buddy obviously denies it. So a month or whatever goes by, and Johnny picks his spot. So they're down here in Cincinnati, as the story is told to me anyway, at the old Music Hall. And the roles are reversed. Rogers is on last. Valentine's in the semifinal. So I think Rogers, anticipating something, had one of the boys take his clothes, put it in their bag or whatever, and keep the bag out of the dressing room, or at least in their sights, or Johnny couldn't get to it. Well, Johnny found another way to do it. Rogers gets dressed and goes out to get his caddy to go back to Columbus, and the caddy's up on concrete blocks, and the rims and the tires are gone. Valentine's throwing these in the trunk and taking them to Columbus with him. So Rogers had to buy all new rims and tires for his Cadillac so he could go home.
There was a certain rapport between the guys, though, because, you saw those two guys in the ring. It was just an awesome match.
Oh, yeah.
Just an awesome match. But they respected each other enough to do those things and still do something just totally different when they were wrestling. I mean, it was just a different era. And I guess maybe today, that's probably not fair, because I'm sure among the top guys, there's got to be tremendous respect between Austin and Rock and Triple
I would think, yeah. And now Rogers was my childhood idol. And I look back and think, I couldn't have hardly picked a better one in terms of psychology and the whole 9 yards there. But yeah, I agree with you, Larry. I think there was a hell of a mutual respect between the two.
Yeah.
Let's go to the calls. Let's go to Jimmy. Jimmy, what's up?
Hey.
Hey, what's going on?
First time caller. Man, y'all are really bringing up some memories. I grew up on the Mid-Atlantic area in the 70s and 80s. I remember I'm sorry to hear about Johnny Valentine's passing. I remember one time he had a match with Tim Woods, the story, and he put the figure 4 on him, I believe, and he wouldn't let it go, and he ended up, the angle was he broke Woods' leg. And the announcer asked him, well, why did you do that? He said, I went temporarily deaf. I'll tell you another thing. You know, Johnny would take 6 or 8, maybe even 10 punches to get one in on you. I remember watching him. He like you always told, he just hammered it home. I tell you another thing. Now I talk to Les for a minute.
Okay.
All right, Les.
Yes.
I really enjoyed your special you had on MTV about wrestling last
Thank
year.
You, sir.
That was really good. Your segments were the highlight of it. I like to deal with the kids.
Didn't you like when he told that guy off?
Yes, I loved it. It was.
We all did.
He was going around telling everybody he was a wrestler. He said, I got to tell you, you're not a wrestler. Yeah, he thought he was cool. I tell you, go back a little ways with Les. Les, I remember you doing a show. I don't know if it was Crockett doing, but I believe it was called Southern Wrestling in the early 80s.
That would have been, that was, in part it was because that was when Ric Flair, Blackjack Mulligan, and Jimmy Crockett Jr. bought the Knoxville territory from Jim Barnett. And, I'd been in Pensacola, actually, with Ron Fuller in Southeastern.
Right.
And they had called me and asked me to come back and produce their TV. So, yeah, that was what was called Southern Wrestling at that time.
Yeah, that was before Barry Windham was Barry Windham. He was Blackjack Mulligan Jr. then.
And a reed-thin young man, exactly.
Yeah, he was. And I tell you, I really enjoyed you on Smoky Mountain Wrestling, too.
Thank you, sir.
That was just, I think if that company had the backing that it needed, that could have been it could have been a major force in wrestling.
I was telling somebody today, we started calling WWF at one point Smoky North. Because the best talent was up there.
Well, I tell you, Les, how did you like working for the Crockett's?
I enjoyed it. I really did. Jim Crockett Sr. was a class gentleman. I mean, I had no problem with the whole family. I worked, of course, the kids, Jimmy Jr. and I were about the same age, and Jackie and I socialized a little bit together. But I worked with the sister as well in the office doing the magazine in the 70s. But Mr. Crockett Sr., a good businessman. He took care of his talent. Now, we were talking about insurance and that sort of thing. I came down with hepatitis in 72 in that territory. And he would call me at least twice a week and say, hey, baby, everything okay? Yes, Jim. What's the doctor say? Well, I'm trying. No, take your time. Don't be in a rush to get back. How are things? Car payment made? Yes, sir. Everything's fine. And he would send either Klondike Bill or Big Boy Brown, who lived over near me, in with a check every week. And then he'd call afterwards, and he'd say, well, how's it? I said, no, I got the check, Jim. No. He said, that's just for incidentals.
Right.
If you need something, you call me.
Man, that's class act.
Yeah. And the other thing was, he always closed down, depending on what day Christmas fell on, we always closed down usually a week, at least a week before Christmas, because he would tell you, he said, I know most of my people are employed by me are from out of state and from out of town, and I want you all to go home, have Christmas with your families and come back and we'll go again.
Man, I didn't know that. That was really nice of
him.
He
was a good gentleman.
I tell you, how did you like working with Rip Hawk? Did you ever work with him?
Oh, sure. Rip was good. Well, Rip gave Ric Flair a good education.
Oh yeah, I used to love to watch Rip. I liked the heels because they were so they give them better interviews and everything.
Yeah, Rip was a good heel interview, very good.
And then he used to always say, "Get the profile, get the profile."
Right, exactly.
All right, y'all have a good one here.
Thanks, sir. Bye.
Okay, thanks a bunch.
Les, MTV's doing like a follow-up on that previous special, right?
Yeah, they're supposed to. They haven't gotten back to me. They didn't. They haven't set a date for production yet. But yeah, they're planning on doing one.
So it would be like catching up on like Roy Fox and things.
That actually could be the hottest deal in this business, at least on a short run, right?
Les, didn't you work wrestling at the Chase? Weren't you in the Coruscant room early in your career?
The what?
The Coruscant room, the Chase Hotel in St. Louis, early in your career.
Yeah.
I want to. Somehow it sticks in my head that you came in with Dennis Hall.
Right.
Okay, was Roger Kirby in that bunch too?
Yeah.
Okay, I kind of remember that. And when the gentleman mentioned Rip Hawk, of course, Hawk, when wrestling at the Chase came into St. Louis, when television came back in 1959, Hawk may have been the first TV star of 1959, 1960 in St. Louis.
You know what I remember, Larry? One of the why it jumps out of my mind, I don't know exactly, but But Bobby Bruns was the booker the first time I worked there.
Yeah, Bobby was there.
And I remember this because I remembered not to make a mistake. Bobby, we're talking about old school guys here. I remember hearing Bobby lay finish out to this guy, and he said, "Now you throw 2 drop kicks, and then he's going to sidestep you on the third one, and he's going to kick your, tap your feet. I need you to land." I don't know what he said, just a foot from the ropes and parallel to the ropes while he's playing his finish out. And the kid threw 1 drop kick and went to miss the second one and landed farther than a foot parallel from the ropes and got his butt chewed out.
Bruns apparently was a pretty good performer in his day, too. Now, I think he went to right about 69. Pat O'Connor came in as a booker. That's about the time I started working for Sam when I was in college.
Right.
And Bruns went to Buffalo with Pedro Martinez, I think.
I'll tell you who was carrying jackets around St. Louis. It was Bobby Shane.
Bobby Shane I knew real well. Very good friend of mine.
And his dad was refereeing.
Yep. Yeah, Bobby.
I didn't know that Bobby Shane's father was Joe Schoenberger.
Yeah.
Well, no, Joe's not father. The father was Lee, but Joe was some sort of relation.
Yeah.
Okay.
What was it, uncle or something?
Something like that, yeah. But Bobby, that's right, yeah, Bobby was the second. That's how he started out, and Joe Millich was probably beating him up down at the YMCA every year.
Yeah, I remember him telling me about Joe. I remember Joe Millich, but I remember Bobby telling me about working out with him.
Yeah.
It's funny. Bobby Heenan carried my jacket when he was a ring boy in Indianapolis, and Bobby Shane in St. Louis.
Good grief. Now, Bobby Shane, if he hadn't been killed in a plane crash, I wonder, Bobby was a hustler.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was a great heel with great psychology.
Of course, he grew up in the St. Louis thing, seeing all that psychology. Even though Bobby was not big, he would be a small guy, I guess, as they would say, about a Benoit type, different style, obviously.
Right.
But Bobby was
during the promotional war in Atlanta, the NWA Gunkel thing, Bobby and Bill Watts were one of our top heel teams.
That's right.
And their chemistry was just so edgy. I mean, there was never any plan to turn one against the other and switch one babyface, but it was always there. Bobby'd sit on the edge of the desk and blow cigar smoke in Bill's face, and Bill would chat, and he'd call him Willie, and Bill would chastise him. I mean, it was great stuff. Gordon and I'd just sit there and, it was stuff they played off the top of their head. It wasn't, that they'd sat in the back and worked it out.
Bobby had a great mind for it. He would have been a terrific booker, I think.
Larry, the ironic thing of that whole, of him dying in that plane crash was the 2 things. Bobby hated to fly in small crafts, and he was afraid of water.
I didn't realize about the water. I knew he hated to fly.
Yeah. Wow. We got to wrap this thing up, unfortunately. I want to thank both of you guys for coming in on short notice, and I wish it was under better circumstances, obviously. Tomorrow on this show, we're going to be at Santa Ana, California. There's going to be a UPW show, and Edge and Christian are going to be there. Tommy Dreamer are going to be there. We're going to have a lot of the guys from that show, including Prototype, Mike Modest, on the air. I'm not sure who else we'll have on the air, but we'll have a full lineup of people, and we'll see you tomorrow at 5.